Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans from all over the world. Let's not forget gats and gittens. Welcome to another fantastic episode, mind blowing, information packed outing of Ask Chuck Dixon, where it's like a quiz show where you get to ask the questions and I have to provide the answers. Now, I haven't done any of these for a couple of weeks. I'm really sorry, but I have been busy. I haven't been doing nothing. I haven't been on vacation or anything like that. Um, I've been writing a lot. I mentioned I was writing a screenplay in earlier episodes. I'm still doing that, and it's remarkable how incredibly slow screenplay writing is compared to writing comics or even writing prose. It just takes a while. Although I'm told by the producers, this isn't a spec screenplay, it's an assigned screenplay. I'm told by the producers that they're really happy with the progress I've made so far. In fact, they were surprised to learn I'd even started it. But I'm about 35 pages in, which, if you know anything about screenwriting, the general rule of thumb is that a page of a screenplay is worth a minute of screen time. So I'm 35 minutes into this movie. And I'm pretty pleased it's coming together. It's a new medium for me, and I have to think about different things than I think about when I write comics or prose, and I got to think more about dialogue because they talk about writing natural sounding dialogue. I got to write a dialogue that's friendly to actors. You can get away with a lot of stuff in comics. You can get away with a lot of stuff in prose that would not work coming out of an actor's mouth. So I kind of think about that kind of stuff, but I'm enjoying it as it is, but it takes a while and it takes up a lot of time and it takes a greater degree of concentration. So I haven't had the time to put together these videos to the level of quality that you expect. And you're like, Chuck, level of quality? Yeah, it's a pretty low bar here, but I haven't even been able to achieve that for the last couple of weeks. So, and the other thing that I was busy writing was Guns of Mars. If you haven't heard of this, Guns of Mars is my take on Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barzoom. Wanted to write this book for the longest time, and it takes place 1,000 years after the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. John Carter, Deja Thoris, Taurus Tarkus, none of those characters appear in this book. It's brand new characters, but set in the world of Barzoom 1,000 years on, when Mars is it's in its death throes. It's very much a post-apocalyptic kind of story set on Mars, but it's also a slam bang action story that I kind of think of as an Italian Western set on Mars. But it's got all the stuff you love. It's got banths and and tharks and all the rest of the flora and fauna that you come to expect, and lots of action. And I like to think preserves the sense of discovery that Burroughs had that made his book so compelling. Initially, it's only available in a leather-bound edition, an artisan leather-bound edition that will be signed by me. There won't be a lot of these sold, so this will be a true rarity, and it's pricey. But I promise you, in the coming months, there will be a hardcover, regular cloth-bound hardcover, an ebook, and audio. So never fear. Guns of Mars will be available at popular prices if you happen to follow the link under this video and get sticker shock when you see how much this leather-bound edition costs. So enough of my excuses and plugging myself and all the rest. Let's move on to your always welcome questions. Bloodhaven. Mike Lockman says, how do you pronounce Bloodhaven? Well, I just did. How do the characters in the world pronounce it? And that, of course, is from Michael Lockman. Yeah, Bloodhaven it's spelled with an umlaut, you'll notice, which, you know, it has German origins initially, uh, possibly Dutch. I guess the proper pronunciation would be, Bloodhaven, but everything gets anglicized. In Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania in particular, there's a lot of towns with French names, but they don't have French pronunciations. And so you get Dubois, Pennsylvania, and things like that. So it's um, not uncommon to see these names anglicized. And that's it. Now, I remember that Scott Peterson, my editor on this book, he loved calling it Bloodhaven. He would have a kick um, pronouncing the name of the city in his own particular way. So, hey, you get a twin spin because you have another excellent question coming up here. Um, Michael Lockman again with, I've heard a lot of stuff about Comico. What was your experience there? Well, Comico was this, upstart little independent company, and I mean little. It started in Norristown, Pennsylvania. And the reason why I became involved with them is because they were within driving distance of where I was living. I thought a comic book company within driving distance. And so I went there, and, at the beginning, Comico was very much amateur night. It was three high school friends who liked comics, and they liked writing and drawing and creating their own comics. And one of them's older brother was a successful physical therapist, so he had some money, and he allowed them to use um, a building that was next door to his practice. I don't know if he rented or bought them this really nice um, old townhouse that they ran Comico out of, and it was basically just it was run out of like one big room, and and the, the the three guys, the three high school pals, they weren't all that talented as comic book creators, but they were certainly enthusiastic, and I think they understood their own limitations, and so they began to expand and look for other creators. And the two outside creators they hired that would go on to greater success in comics were me and Matt Wagner. So Matt Wagner's first work appears through Comico. I'm not sure where Matt Wagner was living, but it must have been close because he was always there. Every time I visited Comico, Matt Wagner was there hanging out. There was a lot of hanging out happening. Because basically it was their company offices and their studio, and I imagine they had a warehouse somewhere, although I never saw it. And eventually they were, because they got into it in an age when if you had a pulse, you could be successful in comics. I mean, comics were having a resurgence of interest because of the growth of the direct market. And they eventually were successful enough that they had money to spend to buy Bill. I should mention Bill Willingham also. He did a superhero series for them, which was Justice Machine, which was pretty popular there for a while. But they began to license stuff like Yamato and Johnny Quest and things like that. And Gotchaman. And, they became quite successful there for a while. And I think eventually they got too big. And they were sold. I really don't know the history of Comico, but I believe the Lasorda brothers, who basically owned the company, they sold it. Now, the work I was doing for them was I was writing a comic called Evangeline, a science fiction series about a nun who serves as an assassin for the Vatican in the future. And I only did an issue for them because there was a bit of an argument over ownership. I never went into this thinking they would own it. I didn't bring them a property thinking this was work for hire. I wasn't working on anything they created. This was something I created. And I don't know what happened with Matt Wagner with Grendel. I don't know if he, but I ended up in arbitration because the contract I signed with them, which never made clear the rights issue, um, it required arbitration. So, which is basically you just sitting in a room with a lawyer who's supposed to be an impartial judge, and he decided in my favor. He decided that the rights to it belonged to me. That Comico did not create this product and therefore could not own it. And that's where my relationship with Comico ended, because they had no interest at all in paying me to do a creator-owned project. And so moved on from here to there, and my creative partner on this at the time unwisely decided we should go to First Comics. And so they're Evangeline lies in copyright limbo, because I don't own it anymore. I don't own even a little bit of it. So in the end, it was all for naught. Except we did, I did like 12 issues for First Comics eventually. Andrew Wilson, do you think writing for the trade has benefited or hurt the comic book industry? What do you see as the pros and cons to it? Toward the end of your time at DC, were you encouraged to do it? Yes, yes. And it wasn't really encouraged. It was, we realized that the future of comics, the sales, um, were the trades. That they were the ongoing money makers, because there was no money in the monthly comics anymore. So basically, we were creating the monthly comics so they could be collected into trades that hopefully would be evergreen and would stay in publication forever. And I realized this, and my editors at the time realized this, and we had many discussions. Largely, most of my discussions were with the aforementioned Scott Peterson about, okay, we're going to write for the trades. What does that mean? Okay, and my thought was, my books are still selling pretty good, and particularly on Nightwing, I gave thoughts to this, and I said, each issue has to be, stand on its own to some point. We still have to think about these as monthly books, but then also think that they are, each book is a chapter in what will be a trade paperback. And so I tried to think in terms of like movie serials or whatever, where there's something happening in every issue, and every issue you came to a conclusion. And it might come to a cliffhanger at the end, but you felt as though you had been given a whole story. That there was enough subplot and character development and things going on, and enough of a beginning, middle, and end, even if it was open-ended, that you felt like you got your money's worth, as a comic book. Because I didn't want to leave that audience behind and abandon them for the people that would wait for the trade. So that's how I approached it. And I approached it on all my titles, and I continue to this day to approach it. If I'm doing a mini series or whatnot, I'm thinking of each individual issue as it's an entertainment package on its own, and then these are collected. Now with Nightwing, because I wrote so far ahead of Scott McDaniel, I wrote like the entire first year before Scott McDaniel was even done with the first issue. Um, I had a lot of time to think and go back, and Scott Peterson and I worked quite a bit. Like, well, how can we strengthen this? Because basically, we were thinking of the first year in terms of 2 paperbacks. So it would be, Nightwing's year 1 in Bloodhaven would be 2 paperbacks. With the saga would be told in 2 paperbacks, and because I worked so far ahead, we were able to move back and forth. So there was a lot of serious discussion amongst professionals of what writing for the trade meant, at least in the bad offices, and at least to my mind, because I'm thinking about the reader, thinking about the reader of the monthly, I'm thinking about the reader of the trade. I've got possibly two different audiences to satisfy. And of course, thinking if these are evergreen, which we wanted them to be, they're a big enough hit that they would stay in publication forever, as Nightwing has. Nightwing, keeps being printed and reprinted and reprinted and reprinted. We wanted to think about that and have that kind of level of quality, and that to us was what writing for the trade meant. Now, to an awful lot of other writers, it meant they could just write one big long story, which, yeah, that's what a trade should be. But I didn't think of it like that. I thought, well, a trade might have 2 3 issue arcs. It might have a 4 issue arc and a couple of one-offs. As long as you thought in 6 issue terms, you were cool. And that's the way I approached it. But a lot of writers thought, well, I'm just going to tell a big old 6 issue long story, and kind of forgot about the monthly. They didn't think about the monthly audience anymore. And so when a lot of writers wrote for the trade, they were writing issues were, in a lot of cases, they were all set up, or issues where not a whole lot happened. My rule of thumb was always you got to have at least 3 pieces of action in the story. It doesn't necessarily have to be fighting. It could be, Robin, swinging over the rooftops, or driving his car fast through the streets. I mean, that's action. Things are moving. It could be, Dick Grayson walking down the street talking to somebody. So we're seeing movement and traffic and surroundings and everything. Something visual, something that isn't people sitting around a table eating, which seems to be the only thing anybody ever thinks of anymore when it comes to presenting dialogue, presenting exposition. I like to have my characters moving, doing something interesting in an interesting locale. But when a lot of writers went to write for the trade, they thought, well, I don't have to think about each issue anymore, and they didn't. And so you end up with issues where people are sitting around talking, sitting around eating and talking, or dealing with a lot of exposition, or front loading a lot of like what normally would have been subplots spread across 6 issues. They're putting the whole subplot in one issue, and it's beginning, middle, and end are all in one issue. Well, that's not how this is supposed to work. A subplot is something that runs through the story. It's in the background. It's something you can cut to provide beats in the story and interest and present your ensemble cast. But a lot of these people writing for this new format, the trade paperback format, simply weren't thinking about that. And if you're a reader of comics right up until today, you realize this is true. You'll read an issue where there's no story. Nothing really happened here. There might be some little cute little thing, but nothing really happened. Nothing happened to advance the story. And I was always about advance the story, advance the story, advance the story. And each issue is a step in that. And you got a lot of stuff, and I saw a lot of this in the 90s, early 2000s, where you get 5 issues of setup and then a whole issue of action, and so that's terrible. I mean, that didn't even read well as a trade to just have, the bulk of the book, 80% of the book, be set up, and then the rest is just action. That movies don't work that way. Stories don't work that way, and particularly in comics, which are an immediate experience, a visual experience. You need stuff going on. You need things, and more and more. I didn't realize this, but more and more, I think in terms of segments. I think in terms of scenes that build the story. And when you're writing for the trade in the wrong way, you're not doing that. You're not creating scenes that build the story. You're just setting stuff up for your big close. And this really cool idea you have for the end of the story. Well, you need to have really cool ideas throughout. And a lot of what I was seeing from a lot of writers was this sort of, I hate to say, but sort of hacked out story that might have had some, like cute little thing at the end that they thought made it all worth it. But if you were buying those books monthly and reading it, I think this is where sales begin to fall off, because people are, we've all done this. You like a comic, you're buying it monthly, and you go to read your comics. You always, if you're a reader, you've got a to be read pile. You know, there's this pile of stuff. Oh, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to read that, and you're going through it, and you realize there's 10 issues of Captain Potato Salad here that I haven't read. Why haven't I read them? Because I lost interest in the story. There's a reason for that. And if you're a comic fan, um, you've had that experience. Where it's like, my God, I didn't even realize I have lost interest in this series. And I think a lot of it, and a lot of the decline in sales, early 2000s leading up to today, um, are because of that. Because of writing for the trade in the incorrect way, putting the emphasis in the wrong place. Twin spin after that incredible question, and I hope cogent answer. Andrew Wilson is back with, what do you think of Neal Adams and his art? What is your favorite Neal Adams comic? Did you ever meet the man himself? Now, Neal Adams was a force in comics, and sadly relatively recently passed. But Neal Adams and Jim Steranko were like the first like new guys to show up in comics. You know, and they ushered in a whole bunch of other new guys. But Steranko and Neal Adams, late '60s, they show up with a bang, and it's pretty evident to comic fans these guys are different. And because think about it, every other guy working in comics at the time, writers and artists, they were all World War II generation guys. They were all basically our dads doing the comics. And here come guys that are younger. They might have been our uncles, or older brothers. they're doing comics, and they're doing it different. Jim Steranko with um, uh, his reverence for comic book storytelling and reverence for the medium and trying to see what it could do and pushing the envelope and everything else. And then you've got Neal Adams with this more illustrative, like commercial art style that he's bringing to it. And it was very exciting, and fans were like, over the moon about Neal Adams and Jim Steranko early days, particularly early 70s. And these guys really, cut a swath. They made an impression with comic fans. I'm stressing fans here because there's a bit of a problem. Now, you can't take away Neal Adams' contribution to Batman along with Denny O'Neil. Denny O'Neil was working hard to take the stigma, as he saw it, of the 1966 television show away from Batman, return Batman to what Denny O'Neil imagined was his roots as a dark, kind of sinister figure, this loner character fighting crime, his endless war on crime in Gotham City, and taking it back to his pulp origins. And Neal Adams is along for a lot of them. Now, Neal wasn't the only artist on these things, but I remember as a fan, we would get most excited about Neal's work. And of course, you got things like Ra's al Ghul and things like that and Man Bat that we, not created by Denny O'Neil, Man Bat created by Frank Robbins, but and Batman's look, um, it's Neal's work on this title visually influenced everybody after him because the stuff looks more mature, and as a teenager reading these, was very much impressed with the fact that there was more hormones in Neal Adams's Batman, and his visuals were more, there was something about them. Hey, there's something different here. Okay, there's something going on here, and so I was a big fan of Neal Adams at the time, particularly like Dead Man, which I think might have been my first exposure to Neal Adams. Either that or an issue of the Spectre that I really thought was awesome. But Dead Man, Neal came on after, I believe, Carmen Infantino drew the origin story, and Neal comes on and basically makes his mark on this character. And really good stuff, and he's experimenting with storytelling and panel composition and all the rest of it, and it's all a good time. And then he comes to what a lot of fans view as his greatest contribution to DC, which was signature contribution, Green Lantern, Green Arrow. Green Lantern sales were beginning to falter. They teamed him up with Green Arrow. They put what they thought was their most stellar team on the book, Denny and Neal, and the book flopped. And this is kind of the bellwether on fans versus casual readers. And that's the problem that Neal would have throughout his career as a comic artist. Now, this guy's a highly successful commercial artist. I mean, he ran a studio, had his own comic book line, and all the rest, and participated in, as you can see here, Superman versus Muhammad Ali, one of the most successful projects DC did in the 70s. But the problem ongoing for Neal at both DC and Marvel was fans like this stuff because we're fans. We're like connoisseurs of comics, and we're looking for something different, and we're appreciating when somebody does something different. But casual readers didn't. They weren't turned on by Neal's artwork, and Green Lantern, Green Arrow kind of was the proof in the pudding, because yes, Neal sold great on Batman, but so did Dick Dillon. So did Frank Robbins when he was drawing Batman. I mean, the sales, Neal didn't move the needle on Batman sales. Yeah, he thrilled fans, but on the newsstand where comics were actually sold, Neal didn't really move it. Nothing against Neal, but the casual comic reader didn't see where Neal was any different than anybody else. He wasn't special. And when Green Lantern and Green Arrow came out, it flopped. Now I know legend has it was this fantastic success and everybody loved it. No, they didn't. It didn't sell well, which is why they didn't keep doing it. It bombed, and they kept doubling down on it, hoping it would find an audience with the youth at the time. Everybody was after the youth audience with the hippie movement and all the rest of it, and the enormous number of baby boomers. It's called baby boom for a reason. There were a whole lot of people of comic book reading age all of a sudden, and they were overestimating because of the media that these kids are all into left-wing, possibly could be into left-wing causes, when nothing could be further from the truth. Kids weren't into left-wing causes. Casual readers weren't into left-wing causes. Green Lantern, Green Arrow just read like, a screed from the Democrat Party, and it bombed. It bombed. And Neal's career in comics really doesn't recover after that. He doesn't really have any hits after that. He returns to Batman every once in a while, but mostly he goes on with his commercial art career and running his studio to great success. Now, the thing you can't take away from Neal and the indelible mark he left on comics, beyond his art, there's nothing. His art's terrific. Although I don't like him as a storyteller, and I can kind of see what casual readers saw in it. They wanted to read a comic book, and Neal was about something else. Too illustrative, and his art sort of took away from the story. He was an okay storyteller. He actually did some really brilliant sequences here and there, but in general, I didn't like his storytelling techniques. Now, Steranko, on the other hand, I loved his storytelling techniques, and he did great stuff. But anyway, the really indelible mark beyond his work that Neal left is on creator rights. Neal was a force to be reckoned with. He liked to talk. He could be very imposing, very opinionated, very arrogant. But in this place, his arrogance paid off for everyone who worked in comics, because he just wouldn't take no for an answer. He would not. He was one of these guys who he could never be wrong, and then eventually he would convince you that he was right, because he was so convinced himself. And he became an outspoken critic of the comic book companies, even while he was working for them. And he basically he was one of the main movers that got Siegel and Schuster money for Superman, for their creation of Superman when the Superman movie came out. Neal just wouldn't shut up, and he would go in front of the media every chance he got, and say these guys are getting ripped off. And here, Warner's has this great big movie coming out, and the last thing they need is bad publicity about the elderly creators of Superman getting shafted by DC Comics. And so he got them, nowhere near the amount of money that they should have had coming to them, but he got them enough money they could live comfortably for the rest of their lives, and ongoing money and credit for creating Superman in the comics. And that's all Neal. And he didn't stop there. I mean, he was an advocate for creator rights for, until the day he passed. When you say, did I meet him? I met him a few times. He's just a really abrasive guy. you he had things to say about the Robin that I was working on, which weren't particularly kind. But I just took it in stride. It's Neal. Okay, he's got his own opinions, his own way of doing things. But I have to say that he helped Graham Nolan and I when we were having difficulties with DC over Dark Knight Rises, and Neal once again, came to the rescue and was very vocal, put a lot of pressure on DC to treat us better, and that was all Neal. And Neal confided in me that because we were promised the moon, Graham and I, on Dark Knight Rises, and we were going to make a fortune off of this, and crazy figures were thrown out there. Kind of figures that make you think about buying a boat. It's like crazy figures were put out there, and we didn't see any of them. And Neal confided in us that he and Denny had gotten like the last great deal out of DC Warner's before the rules were changed, before the goalposts were moved, and he and Denny got a pretty sweet check off of Batman Begins for Ra's al Ghul. And I feel okay saying that now because both men have passed. But I've never mentioned this before. But they got, and I won't mention the figure, but they, yeah, you want to find that check in your mailbox. So they did okay. But that's just for me repayment because Neal did so much for so many creators who worked at DC. Couldn't do a damn thing for anybody who worked at Marvel because Marvel just won't budge on these issues. But DC did, and I gotta say, because of Paul Levitz and because of Jeanette Kahn, they understood what Neal was talking about. They knew fair was fair. Creators deserve some kind of rights, and they deserve some sort of participation in the things that they create. It can't be 100% work for hire, and so it's right that Neal was a beneficiary of the policies that he pushed. Because as far as I know, he didn't make a lot of money from DC over the years until Batman Begins. He didn't see a lot of cash out of them. He really was fighting for all of us who create comics. So there you go. There's my testament to the man, warts and all. Ace Mowick. Can you think of any runs in comics where you think the writer was not a good fit for the title character, even if they were a great writer? For example, if they were a hippie type and they were on a series like Jonah Hex or Unknown Soldier. Sergeant Fury by Gary Friedrich. I think it was a case where he wanted the check, he wanted to write comics, but he wasn't that into World War II. And I got to think that he was getting suggestions from the artists for stories to do, especially with John Severin on inks. Severin said, hey, what about the Battle of the Bulge? What about this? What about that? Especially if you compare them to DC War comics, there's something lacking here. And I know Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos have a lot of fans. And, even as created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, the book's kind of over the top, wild, crazy. But books can change, and Sergeant Rock and Haunted Tank, books like that, they sort of evolved over time to become more mature portrayals of men in combat. And Sergeant Fury never did. It was always goofy. I didn't like it as a kid. I loved John Severin, and it hurt to like pick up this comic that he worked on and not want to buy it because I'm looking at the pages and it's like lots of guys yakking and stupid jokes and silliness and getting in brawls and bars and it's like this isn't what I want to read. I'm going to go over and read me some Enemy Ace. So I think nothing wrong with writing for the paycheck, but you got to invest yourself. You got to the book's not right for you. Got to say maybe somebody else should write this. But I never thought that was a good fit. Jonah Hex, I've seen good writing on Jonah Hex and bad writing on Jonah Hex, and if you don't have a feel for westerns, or you don't want to get mean enough, or you want to alter the thing that you're supposed to be writing to where it's unrecognizable, maybe you should move along. Punisher's another one. I remember when I left the title, when all my books got canceled, the sales went down. They canceled all 3 of Punisher's books. And then they were going to reboot it. And they had like a little contest where you would pitch. And I didn't participate. And the guys who won were John Ostrander and Tom Lyle. And they were going to reboot the Punisher. And I thought, these guys are friends of mine. They're talented. But they are the worst choice for the Punisher imaginable. They were both like, they were both like Jimmy Carter voters, and that's not who should be writing the Punisher. The Punisher really needs someone right wing writing it, or just an outright fascist to write the Punisher, because you got to go places. And I know I worked a lot with Tom, and he was very squeamish. I remember he nicest guy in the world, just the sweetest dude you'd ever want to meet. But I remember going to see Die Hard 2 with him, and he covered his eyes a couple of times. So it's like, no, this guy shouldn't be writing the Punisher. And he would draw the guns, but you could tell he didn't like drawing them. You could tell he wasn't into it, and he like could draw. It's like, okay, I recognize that gun, but it still doesn't look right. Looks like it was drawn by somebody who's just not into it. So I think they were a bad choice. And I can say that because I love both those guys. I love both those guys. It's just a bad fit. Daredevil, yeah. That's a book I wouldn't be a good fit for because I don't like Daredevil. I don't like Matt Murdock. I think he's a bit of a jerk. Not a jerk. It's more of a dupe. It's more of a beta male to me. And I didn't, even as a kid reading these, I was like, yeah, this guy's not Spider-Man. I'm not buying a lot of this stuff. And I know a lot of, the way a lot of writers have written them. A lot of really good writers have written Daredevil. And I'm not going to say they were bad stories. They were good stories. It's just the character never appealed to me. Even when he's well written, he's this. So I would be a bad fit for Daredevil. If you read my Marvel Knights run, you'll see my opinion for Daredevil comes right out of the mouth of Frank Castle in every case, every time they meet. And that's basically, I very rarely talk through my characters, but that's Frank Castle talking for me about the man without fear. Another one I probably wouldn't be a good fit for is Captain Planet, for the same reason that John Ostrander and Tom Lyle were not a good fit for the Punisher. Although I'd love to take a shot at Captain Planet, but the people who would want to do Captain Planet would never publish my version of Captain Planet. I mean, it's a whole environmental movement. I just like to write a Captain Planet story where he just gets the living crap beat out of him by somebody. Or he makes he decides he's going to save the world's ecology and ends up actually making it worse and bringing the Earth to a near extinction event because he thought he had the answers for global warming. Causes a new ice age or something. That would be my Captain Planet. See, I'm not a good fit because I'm not what the I was going to say what the readership would want, but nobody ever read any Nobody cares about this character. But I'm just using him as an example. And but the same thing goes. I mean, I was offered to write the Batman Landmines book, and I turned it down because I said I don't agree with this premise that the United States should disarm itself from using landmines. Yeah, landmines are bad. Why don't you do a comic critical of the Soviet Union, who littered Afghanistan with landmines and never did anything to try to undo that. And there's horrifying things that happen with landmines in Serbia as well. In this period, and yet you're criticizing the United States, where we made our landmines with a shelf life. They're still finding landmines in France that are still active from like World War One. The United States was doing the right thing, and yet they wanted to do a comic with Batman being critical. And I realize this is from Seduction of the Gun. I'm just saying, written by John Ostrander. I wouldn't have been a good fit for Seduction of the Gun either as an NRA member. I mean, that book's premise was ridiculous. But it was Jeanette Kahn, who I have all the respect in the world for, but she was an Upper West Side New York liberal, and she liked impressing her liberal friends by every once in a while doing a heavily political Batman project. If you notice, they never did a heavily political, Green Lantern project or a heavily political Flash project because it had to be Batman because they knew it would sell. They were going to get their point across using Batman as their spokesperson, which I also objected to. So yeah, every writer is not a good fit for every book. I mean, that's obvious. And I have seen runs, although I won't go into any more details. I don't like criticizing other writers because I don't like them criticizing me. I don't want to get a flame war with another writer because we're writers. We'll just never stop writing about each other. Gentle, savage. When it comes to writing villains and their personalities or character gimmicks, what is your favorite type of villain to write? For example, gangsters, mobsters, serial killers, mercenaries, assassins, evil businessmen, thieves, etc. Well, on the subject of villains, there's basically two types of villains generally. There's the grandiose world domination villain. And written correctly, this villain should think he's doing the right thing. Doctor Doom is doing what he thinks is best for Latveria. And if you're a long time Doctor Doom fan like I am, back in the day, Doctor Doom was, he's of gypsy extraction, and he fought with the resistance against the Nazis, defending Latveria, doing the right thing. Now, the thing is that we wed this guy. He's not a total do-gooder. We wed him to a guy who's very, very petty and vindictive, which is what I love about Doom. It's what makes him human. And he's petty and vindictive. This guy is he's got all the 7 deadly sins except gluttony and sloth. He's prideful. He's jealous of others. He's envious of others. He's got to be the smartest guy in the room or he's not happy. He wants to be the smartest guy in the world. That's his ultimate goal. And but he's a survivor. He's a schemer. There's lots of respect there. So a good villain should have things you admire as well as things that you don't. And that's the grand villain. The other type of villain is the venal villain, the bully, the slob, the jerk, the guy who's just doesn't seem to be anything redeemable about him. And yeah, he's petty too and envious, and he's got to be the center of attention. Not the smartest guy in the room because he kind of knows he's not smart, but he's just got to just push everybody around, just be the bad guy because it's all about him. And he's not doing it for any altruistic reason. He doesn't have any cause that he's fighting for. Just him, his comfort, his wants, his desires. And that's the venal, nasty nastiest kind of villain, really, and probably the villain that most of us have met in our lives. We've never met a Doctor Doom. Uh, I'm betting that every single one of us have met Biff Tannins in our life, to one degree or another. And I think the globalist kind of villain, which Doctor Doom is, and Drax. Drax is the best example of all the Bond villains as a globalist. I mean, you think about it, after the Cold War, and even before the Cold War, Bond's enemies were generally globalists. I mean, Spectre is a globalist organization. That gang that meets every year in Switzerland to decide what we peons should all be doing. They are Bond villains. They look like Bond villains. They sound like Bond villains. I don't think Ian Fleming ever imagined that Spectre's meetings would be televised, but that's what's going on. And Drax is a perfect example of a guy who thinks he's doing well for the world by killing most of the population. It's like kind of altruistic maniac. Wants to kill us all to make a world a better place for him and his fashion model friends. The femme fatale is another favorite of mine. The scheming woman who manipulates the good guy into doing things he normally wouldn't do. The femme fatale is at the center of every film noir movie. A film noir movie is a movie where the lead character has lost control of his life. And so often in those movies, it is because of a woman has led him astray. The love of a woman who he really should have run away from has destroyed his life and thrown him into an endless web of deceit and danger. And the femme fatale is one of my favorites. And the other is, and I use this character often, is the sort of dour slob everyday villain. Raymond Burr is the killer in Rear Window, is the best example of this I can think of, and I've used this example many times. Throughout the movie, we see everything from Jimmy Stewart's perspective, from the window of his apartment. And we learn about Raymond Burr through his actions, his body posture, his body language. We never really hear his voice. We never hear what he's saying. But Jimmy Stewart sort of puts two and two together and comes up with 17. Very scant evidence decides that Raymond Burr has murdered his wife. And of course, it turns out he's correct that Raymond Burr has murdered his wife. And it doesn't take Raymond Burr long to figure out who has put the finger on him and comes to visit Jimmy Stewart. And this is the first time we hear Burr's voice, the first time we see him close up, not through binoculars. And he stands in the darkness. We can't see his face. And he plays the victim. He's the bad guy. He killed his wife and buried her, took her away in trash bags, in a trunk or something. Anyway, he killed his wife and took her away. We're never going to see her again. But we know he's the murderer at this point because he's come to kill Jimmy Stewart. And he stands in the darkness, can't see his face. He plays the victim. He says, "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" And just for that moment, we feel sympathy for him. That's a great villain. That's a great villain, fictionally, when you can feel something for them. Now, you made a list of mercenaries, assassins, evil businessmen. Evil businessmen, I think, are okay if you show good businessmen as well. In my stories, anyway, I don't, I'll show an evil capitalist. Sure, capitalists can be evil too. But I always try to balance it by showing a good capitalist as well, so that I'm not writing an anti-capitalist screed, so you try to balance it with the real world. Thieves, love to write about thieves. I love a heist story. I love to write a heist story. Catwoman, one of my favorite characters to write. Assassins, kind of tired of assassins. There's so many assassins and hitmen in movies and TV now because it's shorthand. It's easy to write. It's easy to get into the action when the guy's job is killing people. It just doesn't interest me very much to write thieves and assassins. Serial killers interest me even less. Because again, all your work is done for you in the premise. The guy is a serial killer. I'm more interested in normal people becoming killers, or people becoming killers or criminals for other reasons. Now, you could say, well, thieves, Chuck, thieves, it's already written for you. They're stealing stuff. Yeah. But you got to work out the details of a heist. You got to work out the details of the logistics and everything else. Just being a thief isn't enough in the story. You got to see them, strut their stuff and do their stuff. So that makes it interesting. But I prefer stories where people inadvertently become criminals or become criminals out of necessity. We see why they've become criminals. We see why they've gone on a murder spree or whatever. But I'm tired of hitmen stories, assassin stories, revenge stories. Another one I'm really tired of, and I just like to see us move on to a better brand of villain. And so, the next question, who we got up here? Eugenius Rex. Whenever I attempt to write a script, I usually end up with two characters speaking at each other in extremely long monologues. Is the trick here to parse up these two monologues into something that feels vaguely like natural conversation, or am I just hopelessly terrible at this craft? What can you share about the art of making sure the dialogue between multiple characters feels genuine? That's a tough one. I sweat dialogue. I sweat that you don't want it to sound like dialogue. You don't want it to read like dialogue. You want to make it, like a great actor. A great actor, they're reading lines written for them by somebody else. But if they're a great actor, they can make it seem like they're just speaking off the cuff, or these ideas that they're spouting just occurred to them, or occurring to them at the moment. Like right now, I'm talking to you. I don't have a script. I've got to think of each word individually as they come out of my pie hole. So, um, you can tell I'm not reading them because my delivery is terrible. I'm not even speaking in complete sentences because that's how people talk. And there's a lot of talk about realistic dialogue. I mean, you don't really want realistic dialogue in a movie because it would all be ums and okay and yeah and I guess and yeah okay well whatever. That's how real people talk back and forth. Um, and so you want your dialogue to take on a life of its own, but seem real and seem natural. You know that scene where the good guy is like sneaking around the bad guy's headquarters, and he just happens to come to that vent and overhear a conversation just as the bad guys are basically reviewing the evil stuff they're going to do in detail. Well, that would never happen in real life, and it's bad enough it happens in a movie. I hate it when it happens in a movie. I mean, I'd rather see him, up at the vent listening to the bad guys talk, and they're talking about the Yankees game they watched last night, and they never get around to talking about their evil schemes. That would be far more realistic. So you want, just like everything should be invisible when you write, when you set up something that you're going to pay off later, you don't let the reader know you're setting it up. When you have expository dialogue, you don't want the reader to know they're being told stuff. You want to think it's something else. My greatest advice to you, and I say this over and over again, is watch older movies. Watch American movies from the 1930s and the 1940s. And watch how they do dialogue. Watch how they impart information in an entertaining way. Watch how they inform you sometimes without actually informing you. Sometimes it's what they don't say. There's a movie, and I've recommended this over and over and over again. It's called Easy Living. It stars Gene Arthur and Ray Milland, and it's a screwball comedy. It's what we today call a rom-com. It's amazing how much information is imparted in this movie in rapid fire, almost no time at all. 5 minutes into this movie, the whole premise of the movie is set up, and everything rolls from there. Now, not to say the story's over, it's just set up. The inciting incidents are in motion, and you learn everything you need to know about 4 or 5 characters. It's amazing, and you need to watch it, and you need to put the subtitles on and pay attention to dialogue. Look what they said. Look what they didn't say. And Hollywood writers and Hollywood studios understood this. They didn't want their audiences to be bored. They knew that they understood that their audiences knew the language of cinema, that their audience was sophisticated enough to want to be delivered the goods in a way that was always entertaining, that every scene served two purposes. If it was an expository scene, it was also funny or dramatic or suspenseful or romantic at the same time. Move the story forward, move the story forward. And you can inform the reader. And a lot of times you don't need, there's information the reader doesn't need because they already know it. Okay, if you've brought out your characters as Easy Living does, and it presents the characters, I know you've never heard of this movie. It doesn't matter. Find it. if if you've set up your characters so they're indelible and the reader or viewer understands those characters, there's a lot of information you don't have to give because you already know how you already pretty much know how they're going to react in any given situation. You know their worldview. You know their attitude. And it, properly set up, there's a lot of stuff can go unsaid. Characters. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Another movie to look at is a movie called 1, 2, 3. It's written by oh my God, Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond, his frequent writing partner. And it stars James Cagney in his last great role as a Coca-Cola. Yeah, I know he's holding a Pepsi bottle, but he's a Coca-Cola executive in West Berlin, and he's having problems with the East Germans and the Soviets. And it's a comedy. It's a Cold War comedy, and it's extraordinarily funny and fast-paced. It's one of Billy Wilder's best films. Jimmy Cagney is amazing in it, delivering acres of dialogue. And in those acres of dialogue is rapid fire. You learn all this stuff about him. You learn everything about everything. It's the most entertaining exposition dialogue ever written, but it's also, loaded up with gags and jokes. Cagney's timing is amazing. All the characters bring so much to it, and you learn so much about the period, the attitude, the tone of the time of the Cold War and the Berlin Wall and all the rest of it. And it's another one I highly recommend if you want to study dialogue, if you want to figure out how do I do this where it doesn't sound like, Dr. Explaino has shown up. I mean, think about it. Think about a movie like Tremors. I'm sure most of this audience has seen the original Tremors movie with Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward. And do you remember, we all saw monster movies, and monster movies have a formula, and Tremors somewhat followed that formula, but then it stood the formula on its head. And there's this scene with the scientist, and everybody turns to the scientist and says, what's going on here? What's with these giant worms coming up out of the ground eating everybody? And in a usual monster movie, she would be Dr. Explaino, and she would tell you all about her theories about where these monsters came from and the rest of it. But she doesn't. She says, I'm a seismologist. I don't know where the hell these things came from. I don't know anything about this. Now, did that hurt the film? No, because you did not need that information. You knew everything about those giant worms you needed to know. You didn't need anybody explaining it to you. Now, not only did they avoid exposition, they gave the movie one of the biggest laughs. And also let the viewers know, hey, this movie is respecting your intelligence. It knows that you know this kind of movie, and we're all having fun. So there's an example for you. Now, I frequently talk about Red River, which is another movie to study for dialogue, where things are imparted in the dialogue that aren't, they're not explicitly described. They're not explicitly told. At the very beginning of the movie, Walter Brennan is asked what his relationship with John Wayne is in the movie. And his answer is, well, me and Dunstan, we're me and Dunstan. And you understand everything from that. He's told you nothing about their relationship, but you understand these guys feel a kinship, a partnership that cannot be broken. That it's enough to just say their names together, just for him to say, me and Dunstan. And the way Brennan delivers the line, of course, helps sell it as well. But it's a brilliant piece of dialogue. It tells you everything you need to know about those characters. It's a rich piece of exposition without really telling you anything. And there's a scene I always point to in this movie where Noah Beery Jr. is one of the wranglers. It's a movie about a cattle drive. It's called Red River. Howard Hawks directed it. Noah Beery Jr. Is sent on an errand with John Ireland, another character in the movie, and he returns without John Ireland, and the characters ask him, what happened to him, and he doesn't tell you what happened to John Ireland. He tells a story about a horse that they all knew, a filly, and you remember that filly, and everybody does, and they know right where John Ireland is. He met a woman, but it's never explicitly told. It's never explicitly told. And it's a great scene, and it's funny, and it's charming, and it informs you without informing you. Now, I know this is all nuance and finesse and everything else, and I had a hard time learning it too. It's like I'm just watching the movie going, well, why do I know this? When did they tell me this? And how did they tell me this? And then, of course, we've all watched that movie where it's like, oh my gosh, is every guy going to ever stop talking? I already know all this stuff. Flip side, George Lucas. George Lucas writes the worst dialogue in the history of cinema. Absolutely the worst. Carrie Fisher should have won an award, Academy Award, simply for delivering the line, I knew it, I knew you weren't in it for the money, in a way that doesn't make everybody cringe. I mean, that's a horrible line in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, first movie. But she managed to deliver it with enthusiasm and a level of commitment the line did not deserve. It's awful. As Harrison Ford said to George Lucas when they were filming the first movie, he says, "You write this shit, we've got to say it." And it's a testament to the actors in it that they can get through this crap. Look at I remember when they reissued Star Wars in IMAX, and I went with Jordan Gorfinkel, and I went to see it in New York, big IMAX theater. Went to see Star Wars, and he had already seen it in IMAX, and he said, I haven't watched this movie in years, and it wasn't until I saw it this time that I realized how whiny Luke Skywalker is. And of course, every time Luke Skywalker talked in the movie, we were cracking up because we remembered what Gorfit said. He played it whiny. Because what else could you do with those lines? They sound whiny. They're written whiny. And then, you get to the prequels and the wheels come off. I mean, he doesn't have the kind of talented actors with the kind of commitment to the material that's needed. And he's terrible actor-director. So they've got to spout these lines of dialogue. And the stuff between Anakin and Padme, it's painful. It's horrible. So if you want to see how not to write dialogue, how not to inform the reader, how not to do exposition, you can do no better or worse than look at what Lucas does. So, I mean, that's just the hard facts. So dialogue is tough. It's not easy. You gotta work at it. You gotta study it. You gotta become a student of dialogue. And if anybody requests it, I can make a list. I can make up a list here, maybe next time, of movies to suggest to watch. I'm thinking of a whole bunch of them. This is coming off, Casablanca, Chinatown, just coming off the top of my head. The Wild Bunch has some incredible dialogue, expository dialogue in it. Well, there you go. There you go. Hey, Joe Bennett and I, we worked hard on Horseman 2, which is available. I'm going to put a link down below. You can get Horseman 2 for the next few weeks, straight from the Rippaverse. This is an ongoing series. I have written Horseman well into 2026, and Joe and I are committed to bringing you this awesome story of Hector Caballero, a non-superpowered vigilante, trying to make his way in the city of Flores Park in the Free Republic of Texas. And we're having a ball. We introduce a few new villains in Horseman 2. We pay off what the story that began in Horseman 1 and set the table for a multi-book epic that will run through Horseman and Alpha Corps. As I said, well into 2026. If you want to get a hold of me with questions, like the awesome questions the folks sent in today, you can get a hold of me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com. It is the most reliable way of reaching me. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for watching and liking and subscribing. And if you could, please spread the word to anybody else out there who thinks they might want to listen to some geeky guy rambling on about media for more than an hour today. So I'm trying to make up for missing the last couple of weeks of broadcasts, and I promise I will try not to miss any more. And I hopefully will see you all down the road.